everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Oshi no Ko, I just wanted to be in a band, side story. After the semi-chapter 41 to 55, side story. After the Enfants Terribles claimed an overwhelmingly dominant victory in the ASEAN finals. Their opponent in the final stage was an idol group from a mid-sized agency, not one of the giants, but substantial enough. Naturally, they were no match for Enfants Terribles. Enfants Terribles didn't surrender a single win to them throughout the finals. This was true even when we performed an opera-like dirge composed by our bald bassist, Shuji. To be honest, regarding the performance of that funeral march-style opera, we actually might have lost if it weren't for the sheer weight of the name, Enfants Terribles, by that point. The winner of this season's ASEAN is Enfants Terribles. The rewards for winning ASEAN were a grand prize of 1 billion yen and 3 Toyota Camrys. For the record, my dream car in my past life was a Kia Stinger. The pinnacle of a cost-effective sports sedan that a commoner could realistically dream of was about the level of a Stinger. But I still can't even drive. The legal age to obtain a driver's license in Japan is 18, the same as in Korea. And in this world, I am still only 16. Don't worry, we'll give you a ride. Hey kid, give us a goo-goo gaga. Just wait until you guys get off this stage. You're dead. After the ASEAN finals ended, we were literally collapsed in the rehearsal studio, trying to catch some sleep. No matter how easy the opponent might have seemed, it's not like we could half prepare for a performance. The fatigue from the finals had accumulated quite heavily. The sun is already high in the sky. The one who woke us was the girl with the violet hair, AI. She was wearing a party hat, holding a cake in one hand and a party popper in the other. Is this what the joy of raising a daughter feels like? I looked at AI with a satisfied expression. Any family with AI as a member was bound to be happy. To abandon such a precious daughter, one so cute you wouldn't feel pain even if you put her in your eye. AI's parents essentially kicked away their own fortune. Every time I thought about it, I felt they deserved divine punishment. So Hyde, what are you going to do now? AI asked me while stabbing a piece of a strawberry whipped cream cake with her fork. Ah, there's cream on her lip. I wiped the whipped cream from the corner of her mouth with my finger while objectively assessing our current situation. First off, we had long since conquered the Billboard Japan Hot 100. Except for Shuji's opera-style dirge, our songs were sweeping the top 8 spots in a row. The media already treated us as more than just rising stars, we were legitimate stars. Our public recognition had grown so much that it was difficult to move through the streets due to autograph requests, and event invitations were flooding in non-stop. Literally, Enfants Terribles had become the absolute idols of the Japanese archipelago. Shuji, Yokishi. What do you think about us joining an agency? Based on what we experienced during the semifinals, we did need an agency. Right now, our popularity was soaring through the roof, so the major agencies couldn't touch us. However, an individual alone isn't enough to protect against the systemic tyranny of the major giants. Kid, we don't like being tied down anywhere. Leader, I feel the same way. Actually, I agreed with them. If we were only thinking about ourselves. What I'm suggesting is that we join the same agency AI is in. AI, who had been listening to our conversation, was so surprised she dropped her fork. Was it really that shocking? We saw how filthy this industry is during the semifinals. Let's join that agency and become AI's backing. If that's the reason, I'm all for it. Kid, I was already planning to crush anyone who messed with the mascot of Enfants Terribles with my muscles. That sounds like a great idea. As a result of objectively looking at ourselves, we were now superstars in Japan. Superstars with a substantial fandom at that. Simply by us joining, it would become very difficult for other major agencies to mess with the company AI belonged to. If push came to shove, we could intervene under the pretext of being in the same agency. Wait, what was the name of AI's agency again? Chapter 42, Side Story. the way to Ichigo production is already unusual. 1022 words we followed AI toward Ichigo production. She wore a bewildered expression, but we are men who follow through on our word once it's spoken. Since we require zero training costs and plan to set the agency's profit share incredibly low, the amount of money we would bring in would be on a completely different level than the underground idols of Bikamachi. It was certain they would welcome us with open arms. What are you setting the profit ratio at? How about a generous 9:1? Of course, the 9 belonged to us, enfant terribles. Honestly, even giving a 10% cut was a massive concession from a band. Bands don't cost much to manage, yet the money they pull in compared to their overhead is staggering. I recall Bono, the frontman of U2 in my past life, had a net worth of about 2 trillion won after taxes. The reason bands rake in so much profit is that every part of the process is an in-house operation. Unlike idols, who are manufactured by gathering industry elites and splitting the equity among them, a band keeps 100% of the earnings for themselves. In other words, there are no middleman fees. Even for album sales, because the band handles their own producing, they don't lose cuts to external producers, the money flows straight into their bank accounts. To be honest, the settlement royalties from next month alone for our tracks currently charting on the Billboard Japan Hot 100 would easily surpass the 1 billion won prize money Enfant Terribles won from Asayan. Because Viva la Vida is all I hear on the streets even now. Bands can live comfortably off being a one-hit wonder, and I had already pumped out several hits. Truthfully, money concerns. I didn't need them anymore. It meant I could finally live a life solely dedicated to music. While I was lost in those thoughts, AI looked at me with a questioning gaze. Hyde, are you really coming to our agency? Can't you go somewhere better? Of course, as AI said, we could go to a much larger agency. Even though I'd already given one major agency the middle finger, they would welcome us more than anyone if we actually stepped into their arms. Though they'd discard us like tools once our popularity waned. An even bigger problem was that those agencies didn't yet realize how much money band music could actually make. They would surely act high and mighty during negotiations and offer unfavorable terms. From our perspective, not needing any actual management, there was no reason to go. It was more advantageous for us to go to an agency that had nothing but where we could build a relationship of trust, signing a contract with relatively generous terms. There's no reason to go to a place that does nothing for us. Life is give and take. Essentially, the only thing an agency can do for a band is marketing at the start of their career. Unlike idol groups, a band doesn't have much practical need for an agency. Connections with distribution companies. You just walk in with a CD and negotiate the deal on the spot. If they get cocky during the split negotiations, then you move to a different distributor. Accounting. Bands usually handle their settlements through their own hired accountants rather than the agencies. There's little difference between an agency accountant and a personal one. In fact, a personal accountant you can consult with on a detailed level is far more convenient for a band. Gigs aren't planned by the agency anyway, they're planned by event promoters. Since the band connects directly with the promoters to iron out the technicalities, the agency has nothing to plan. Honestly, an agency provides nothing to a band. Especially since I, having spent a lifetime as a session musician, have nothing left to learn about the business side anyway. We just needed a face for the organization, something to move our equipment and stand at the forefront as a legal entity if legal trouble arose. However, that explanation was too realistic and cold for a young girl like her to hear. To be your shield. Well said. Big bro, that's a damn fine way to put it. And it wasn't a lie. Even in my past life, large agencies tended to look down on small agencies or independent indie groups. But this world crossed a line. Rigging the competition on a show that's becoming a literal syndrome. Since I viewed AI as a daughter, I felt extremely uneasy. We were able to crush the rigging with pure skill, but could AI do the same? What kind of parent could stand by and watch their child's wings be clipped by someone else's hand? That was who AI was to me. She was a fragile child who had already been wounded too many times, and was only just beginning to heal. I hoped she would at least no longer suffer from the storms of the world. Someone has to play the role of the shield. That was the resolution I made after the incident during the ASEAN semifinals. Is this really the Ichigo production building? It was an incredibly meager building to be called an agency headquarters. And the door was locked. President Sato must have gone somewhere. If this agency turned out to be too sketchy, I felt like we should be the ones rescuing AI from it. If necessary, I would just start my own agency. Big bro, this door is way too flimsy, isn't it? Yokishi, our muscular mixed-race drummer, was rattling the door, his massive biceps and triceps bulging. Wait, isn't he going to break it at this rate? Ah, he actually broke it. You muscle brain. What are you doing? Shuji was fuming, his bald head practically glowing with rage, while AI looked completely stunned by the bizarre scene. Just then, a man with blonde hair and a rough beard watching the scene from behind let out a roar. What the hell are you guys doing? It feels like we've completely blown the first impression. Chapter 43, Side Story. The contract with Ichigo Production is already a mess. 1009 words. The man with blonde hair and a rough beard silently stared at the three muscular men sitting before him. He looked at these men, the current blue chips of the Japanese entertainment industry, who were stirring up a literal storm. Damned idols. I should have realized something was up the moment they started talking about being on Fonterrable's stands or whatever. From his perspective, it was utterly incomprehensible. He had only just launched Bikomachi, and Ichigo Production didn't even have a single group in the mainstream yet, and yet, here they were. However, he had no intention of accepting them. Blonde beard. How about a 9:1 revenue split? It's not Mr. Blonde Beard, it's Saito. And I'm not signing a contract with you guys. If any other major agency heard this, they would have been gasping in shock, but the man known as Saito Ichigo was simply that kind of person. Even in this rotten entertainment world, he believed that one had to maintain certain lines as a human being, and above all, one had to uphold loyalty, toward their agency's idols more than anyone else. Sunglasses guy, what's the reason? Honestly, isn't this a massive opportunity from your perspective? It's because your scale is too large compared to ours. They were currently the most popular, peak-level superstars in Japan. Stars with the creative power to pump out 9 hit songs in a short period, a feat most struggle to achieve even once. Ichigo Production lacked the capacity to manage them, and it was certain that all their agency's resources would be sucked into on Fonterrable's, effectively resulting in Bikomachi being discarded once their usefulness was over. No matter how much affection he had for Bikomachi and AI, a corporation is fundamentally an organization that follows money, not sentiment. If a group like on Fonterrable's joined, Ichigo Production could never remain the same as it was now. It seems like you guys care about AI too, but you joining us would actually hinder that girl. I'm a small-minded man. I don't have the confidence to manage Bikomachi with the same passion I have now once you guys are in the picture. Upon hearing those words, the handsome young man named Hyde widened his eyes, as if he had been struck in the head with a hammer. After pondering for a long while, he finally spoke. First off, there isn't much a label needs to manage for a band. Just give us the budget and hire people to move our equipment. What we need is a person we can trust and a corporate name that can move systematically if legal issues arise. The man with blonde hair and a rough beard was a rare breed in this industry, a man who lived by a code of honor. What they needed wasn't a company to micromanage them, but a reliable person to handle the legalities. They had come here with a somewhat light-hearted mindset, but this seemed like a remarkably decent agency. What do you mean by that? A band is different from idols. We do the lyrics, composition, distribution, and even the concert designs ourselves. That means Ichigo Production's management capacity won't be drained by us. He's right, Pops. We don't exactly work by leaning on anyone else's help. If anyone tries to interfere with our work, I'll punch them straight in the jaw, so don't you worry about that. Hyde found himself liking this man, Saito Ichigo. Where else in this industry could you find a president who treats his idols not as parts or consumables, but like his own children? One could confidently say they almost didn't exist. There surely wouldn't be another industry professional anywhere else in the world who would act to protect his idols even if it meant kicking away his own path to success. So all you need to do is connect us with a reliable accountant and lawyer. As for moving equipment, we can just hire people anyway. Then, if we aren't doing anything for you, isn't the one you're giving us way too high? Even in my own opinion, giving away 10% was a very generous contract. However, the president of this agency was a man worth that level of investment. Yes, this was an investment in a person one could trust with work in this industry. After all, the hardest thing to find in professional life is someone truly reliable. Just think of it as an investment. Though we'll have to iron out the specific settlement ratios for each sector. Of course, you might know a person's heart, but you never know how they'll handle money. He might be a man of honor now, but there's no telling if he'll stay that way after the money starts rolling in. I slid my bankbook forward as I spoke. I might not know about money, but the story changes if I become a major shareholder. This is investment capital. In exchange, hand over some shares of Ichigo production. In that case, I'll chip in some too. Musselman, that's dirty. If you're doing it, I have no choice but to do it too. This way, even after we join Ichigo production, we can prevent Bikamachi from being discarded. It might be overprotective, but if Ichigo production shows signs of abandoning Bikamachi, I will intervene. As a major shareholder. Originally, idols are built with money and launched with money. The stars of an idol group are, by nature, manufactured through capital. If AI's co-workers felt jealous of her talent, then I would just pour enough money into their training that they wouldn't have time to feel jealous. If they all struggle through the grind together, their relationship was bound to improve anyway. I'll be in your care then, President Sato. Damned star. It's not Sato, it's Saito. The president of Ichigo Production and Hyde, the leader of Enfant Terribles, shook hands while looking into each other's eyes. Oh, is that how you talk to a major shareholder? Chapter 44. I just wanted to start a band, but the very first music show is already unusual. 1124 words. On a day when AI was resting from her activities, Saito Ichigo, a man with shock yellow hair and a rugged beard, paid a visit to our practice room. Our first meeting had started with property damage, but since signing that contract, we had maintained a fairly decent relationship. You guys are still sweeping the Billboard Japan Hot 100, and the media is practically worshipping you. Isn't it about time you started some public activities? For a full 2 weeks, we had stayed out of the public eye, cooped up in the practice room. The reason was simple: before starting our full-scale activities, we needed to find an accountant and a lawyer to help manage the band's operations. Well, I guess we should strike while the iron is hot. I stretched an indifferent expression on my face and finally spoke. To truly etch our names into the soul of Japan forever, we did need to begin our official activities soon. Interest usually burns out as quickly as it ignites. A band's real revenue comes from live events and world tours. And as long as there are people seeking entertainment, events are held year-round. To event organizers, we were the ultimate blue-chip prospect. Enfant Terribles was currently a powerhouse capable of drawing over 30,000 people anywhere they went. We traveled around, delivering incredible performances at every event we attended. In my past life, I had mastered every bizarre and wild performance style imaginable. A band's true rock and roll spirit is determined by the physical energy of the performance. However, there was one glaring problem. Hand sinking again? That son of a bitch. Hey, calm down, Chrome Dome. You caused a scene last time too. Since this was a world where band music essentially didn't exist, almost no venues were equipped with proper audio systems. Unless it was a legitimate festival or a massive-scale celebration, we usually had to fill our sets with lip syncing and hand syncing. Of course, since I played both vocals and guitar, I had to perform live most of the time, but it wasn't the case for the other members. Still, it was enjoyable. Making music in front of people who love us is always a thrill. Wah! We waved and ran up onto the stage. Naturally, the expression of our perfectionist bassist, Shuji, was far from pleasant. I'm not some kind of clown. Hey, smile, smile. Look, your face is telling the whole world how pissed you are, Baldy. Heeding our words, he forced a grin and waved at the crowd. But that was the look he always had right before he caused trouble. That mad scientist bastard. Bad premonitions are rarely wrong. To make it painfully obvious that he was currently hand-syncing, the mad scientist started pulling all sorts of stunts. I can't believe he actually threw his bass to the crowd and started playing air guitar. Anyway, despite various mishaps, performing in front of massive crowds was always a joy. It was only natural that TV stations began seeking us out, the blue-chip kings of the event world. There was just one issue: even the TV stations lacked proper live audio equipment. Leader, I really can't tolerate this one. Hyde, I feel the same way. To be honest, this was crossing the line. Even if this world lacked a band culture, this was a national broadcast station. How could they not have a proper sound setup? If they didn't have the gear, they shouldn't have invited us in the first place. I agree this time too. In my past life, when TV stations force bands to hand sync, the bands would often stage deliberate rebellions. They'd dance while holding their guitars, or pretend to eat the microphone while singing. That sounds fun. I believe that if a TV station calls a singer, they should at least provide the proper audio environment. That is the basic courtesy and respect due to an artist. Honestly, they started it. The stars of the band Syndrome you've all been waiting for. Enfants terribles. As the host finished his introduction, 3 muscular men with solemn expressions stepped onto the stage. They looked as if they were just waiting for the song to begin. As the song started, a nightmare that the TV station never wanted to imagine began to unfold. It started with our hulking, mixed-race drummer, Yokishi, at the back. He used his brute strength to tear his shirt apart, snapped his drumsticks in half, and then grabbed several drum components and started doing squats. Beads of sweat began to pour off him, not from the exertion of drumming, but from his workout. He looked less like a musician and more like a competitor prepping for a bodybuilding show. The disaster didn't stop there. The next catastrophe began when our bald bassist decided to snap his bass guitar. After tossing the broken fragments of his bass off the stage, he began to perform a wretched, awkward dance. If he had done that in a club, he would have been kicked out for being ridiculous, but this was a televised stage. His absurd dancing, accompanied by light reflecting off his shiny bald head, began broadcasting to every corner of the Japanese archipelago. And mind you, it was a live broadcast. The PD realized he was screwed and tried to run toward the stage, but his strength was no match for the sea of fanatical audience members he had to plow through. Contrary to the station's desperate hopes, the disaster escalated. The yellow-haired rebel, who had been singing somewhat tamely, suddenly spat out a curse in the lyrics, took his hands off his guitar, ripped the microphone from the stand, and began stuffing it into his mouth. Mwagwar mumble. Unlike the instruments, the vocals were being broadcast live, so the entire nation heard the sound of a yellow-haired youth mumbling while trying to swallow a microphone. It was a performance specifically designed to give the middle finger to the TV station. The sight of a bodybuilding show, a vile dance performance, and a microphone-eating show happening simultaneously on one stage was a moment that would go down in the annals of broadcasting history. As the song reached its climax, the audience, catching onto the chaotic vibe, stormed the stage to join the carnage. Some engaged in a frantic frenzy of dance, while others started doing squats alongside the muscular drummer. Why aren't you cutting the transmission yet? Stop the broadcast. Naturally, the next morning, the front page of every newspaper was occupied by enfants terribles. The enfants terribles pranks continue with full force. The insolent rebels who mock the Japanese entertainment industry. Are they truly acceptable? Chapter 45. I just wanted to watch my Oshi's broadcast, but I ended up sinking. For AI, it was a peaceful day like any other. Actually, it was more than just peaceful, it was a lucky day. That morning, when she fried an egg, it came out with 2 yolks, and since there was a BOGO event for Haagen-Dazs, she had arrived to meet President Sato in a state of pure bliss, her arms full of ice cream. President Sato. It's not Sato. Anyway, AI, you look like you're in a great mood today. The reason she had come to Ichigo Production was to watch Enfant Terrible's first music show appearance since Asian. Hyde had spent the previous night expressing his excitement to her about finally performing on a proper stage, so she was struggling to suppress her own fluttering heart as she waited for their turn. I should eat my Haagen-Dazs while I watch. It was in that brief moment when she reached for the ice cream. Disaster always strikes when one's guard is down. Goddamn sons of. For some reason, President Sato was on his knees, clutching the back of his neck and weeping. Sobbing, in fact. The aftermath, the cleanup, who's going to handle it? I have to, don't I? Wait, if I just close Ichigo Production. They're the majority shareholders of Ichigo Production, aren't they? Cleanup. She suddenly recalled all the eccentric stunts they had pulled during the Asian broadcast. However, she wasn't too worried. No matter how many accidents they caused, they hadn't repeated anything as severe as throwing middle fingers and swearing at the station staff since then. The girl with violet hair rubbed her eyes repeatedly, unable to believe what she was seeing. The scene was bizarre. This was clearly a music show, yet Yokishi was lifting his drums high over his head to flex his muscles, and Shuji was performing a grotesque dance that defied description. But if it's Hyde will wrap things up properly. Fortunately, her Oshi, Hyde, was singing quietly without causing any trouble. Though he was doing some air guitar in the middle of it, he was extremely well-behaved compared to those 2 causing a riot behind him. But life rarely goes as one hopes. Hyde, why are you pulling the mic out? There was no way. Who was Hyde to her? He was the kind, gentle person who taught her the meaning of a bond, she who had grown up without a family. A man as gentle and sweet as him would never join such a chaotic mess. Was the microphone edible? The violet-haired girl began to descend into horror. The handsome blonde young man had shoved the microphone he'd yanked from the stand into his mouth, and was mumbling into it. The sound of Hyde's brilliant tongue-twisting began to resonate in her ears. Arga, what on earth was that bizarre, grotesque sound? It was the most hideous noise she had heard since that funeral dirge Shuji had composed. She inadvertently dropped her Haagen-Dazs, and the spoon she'd brought to eat it with. She could feel the coldness of the ice cream hitting her foot, but that wasn't what mattered right now. At least he didn't swear at the staff. The moment she tried to rationalize the situation, she saw the audience joining in the madness. The sight of dozens of people doing squats and wild, chaotic dancing was enough to be called the most shocking spectacle of her life. AI collapsed to her knees, sinking in despair. Can Ichigo Production even survive this? She seriously began to consider if she should look for a career other than being an idol. And then, the culprits behind the chaos returned to Ichigo Production, wearing refreshed smiles, party hats, and carrying a cake. A cake. Party hats. At that shocking sight, President Sato collapsed again. Quite literally, he fainted with foam at his mouth. Hyde. You caused another disaster, didn't you? Since the unreliable Sato had already sunk, she decided she had to give Hyde a piece of her mind. That performance was a traumatic scene she never wanted to remember again. Don't worry, AI. We handled the aftermath properly. Hearing his refreshing laugh and cheerful words, the violet-haired girl also collapsed to her knees. She couldn't understand this man who seemingly lost his mind the moment the word rock was mentioned. Actually, she might be able to understand, but she really didn't want to. Chapter 46. I just wanted to start a band, but it's a mess even before album production. 11:06 words after the series of commotions had settled down to some extent, a man with blonde hair and a rugged beard began to speak to the men of Enfants Terribles. I'm glad you handled the aftermath well. But please, don't do anything that heart-stopping ever again. You damn stars. However, Hyde let the plea from the president of Ichigo Production go in one ear and out the other. The antics he pulled now were significantly toned down compared to the true stories of his past life. He believed that a band, ultimately, was a form of entertainment. Therefore, he felt an obligation to show the public the rock star lifestyle alongside the music. In the first place, a great band isn't created just by being good at music. His philosophy was that a band could only become great if their actions supported the spirit imbued in their music. By the way, shouldn't you guys release more songs to deal with the cleanup? What Enfants Terribles had promised the broadcasting station was that they would hold their first live and special performances there after the release of their first studio album. Leader, I think it would be better to release a single before we make the first album. Hey, Baldy. Is there really a need for that? Muscleman, your brain is made of muscle so you wouldn't know, but singles are originally released for promotional purposes. In fact, until the late 90s, rock bands often released singles to promote their new music before putting out a full-length album. Essentially, before the development of social media, single albums served as a vital tool for viral marketing. Shuji's argument is certainly rational. Although Enfants Terribles currently enjoyed overwhelming popularity and support in Japan, they were only hearing rumors abroad and hadn't yet received substantial recognition. The reason was their copyright agreement with Asayan. They had signed a contract giving the show exclusive distribution of the songs released during the broadcast within Japan for 1 year after the show ended. I agree with Shuji. Let's release a single first to make the fans abroad crave our music. Despite saying that, Hyde was fidgeting with his guitar pick out of excitement. In his past life, he had helped others release albums, but he had never released one under his own name. This time, I'm going to make a perfectly killer song. Are you sure you're not just going to bring another funeral dirge like last time, Baldy? It was good to be fired up about the album. However, before creating it, they had to decide on a concept. While a single just required picking one killer track, a studio album demanded a cohesive theme. Leader, how about an opera-like feel? Something experimental and dreamlike. Wouldn't it be better to each write a song like we did for Asayan? If we all make one, another song like Tears might come out. The bald bassist's face turned red like a tomato as he began to tackle the muscular drummer's words. Muscleman, an album needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. Music is an art form where everything is connected. No, an album just needs to have good songs. What else do you need? That's just your opinion. Imagine listeners following our usual exciting songs, and then Tears suddenly pops up. You think they'd actually like that? The two then grabbed each other by the collars and started fighting. Actually, this was a fairly standard process for a band creating music. Unlike idols, bands handle every stage of album production themselves, so musical conflicts occur frequently. Even if they usually got along, instrumentalists tended to lose their minds the moment music was discussed, making heated arguments an essential part of the production process. The general rule was that the more intense the fight, the better the resulting album. Honestly, unless they started smashing guitars over each other's heads, this level of fighting was no problem at all. But before that, there were a few songs they had used during their jam sessions. Tracks like Children of the Night or Layla. Since the atmosphere of these songs was similar to the music Enfants Terribles usually played, Hyde thought it would be appropriate to use them. Hey, calm down for a second. Let go of each other's collars first. We have the songs we used when we practiced. Have you never seen an opera or a musical? Songs only become art when they're connected. I'm saying we should try that in our style. The bald bassist's voice grew louder. But the muscular drummer was not to be outdone in terms of volume. He, too, utilized his beefy diaphragm muscles to raise his voice. "Hey, Baldy. That's not an opera, that's called a dog's dinner. Just like that funeral dirge you brought last time." "Funeral dirge? Do you know how experimental that song is? And who was the one who composed the string parts for Tears?" The bald bassist and the muscular mixed-race drummer continued to fight. It looked like they were about to bash each other's skulls in with their own instruments at any moment. Saito Ichigo, seeing this sight for the first time, looked like he was about to faint with foam at his mouth, while AI, who was already used to such scenes, had long since left to go eat Häagen-Dazs. "Hide, I'm going to go eat Häagen-Dazs. Let me know when they're done." She chirped and skipped away. The only stabilizer capable of stopping those two had vanished. The two men bickered for another 20 minutes before eventually storming out of the office. The space they left behind was a total mess. The only people left in the room were President Saito, who had already mentally checked out, and Hyde. Hyde closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh at the disastrous sight. "I should leave too." On the first day of discussing album production, just like the scene that had been turned into a shambles, there were 0 results. "You damn stars, have you decided on the album concept? Production is still in a deadlock. How far have you gotten?" After a period of waiting, the voice of the blonde young man finally reached President Sato's ears. Once the full weight of the words sank in, the president clutched the back of his neck and groaned. "You pieces of work. You haven't decided a single thing in an entire week." As it turned out, the process of a band making an album was always destined to be a mess. Chapter 47. I just wanted to start a band, but it feels like the bald bassist wrote a song while on drugs. How is an album actually made? Basically, an album is a collection of 8 or more songs gathered for release. Since it's practically the only medium capable of showcasing a band's musical worldview, album production is arguably the most critical activity for any group. In the case of bands, they typically follow a pattern of releasing singles first before dropping a full-length album. This differs from the common practice in the Korean idol industry, where a lead track is released via a mini-album, followed much later by a full-length studio recording. One might argue there isn't much difference since songs are being released either way, but in Western music, the concept of a title track, lead single, doesn't function the same way. Unlike the practice where everything except the lead single is treated as filler, overseas artists often pour their souls into every single track on the record. In short, the sheer labor an international artist puts into a single is comparable to the effort a typical artist puts into an entire full-length album. But the most pressing reality was this: we hadn't even decided which songs to put on the single yet. A full week had passed since our last argument. Because we couldn't even agree on a single, let alone a concept for the full album, we reached a compromise. The member who wrote the best song over the past week would take the lead in producing the debut album. Naturally, AI was scheduled to participate in the evaluation as the mascot of Enfants Terribles. Since she had been learning the basics of composition from the 3 of us, we figured her presence would help provide a more objective perspective. I'm taking control of the first album. I couldn't imagine myself losing. The song I brought was a track called Whatever by a band called Oasis. It was a song that sang of hope, the idea that you can be whatever you dream of, accompanied by a cheerful string arrangement. It was a personal favorite from my past life, and its philosophy of layering a deep message over a simple, addictive melody perfectly aligned with my musical direction. Let's get this show on the road. Shuji, our bald bassist, urged us on with a look of overwhelming confidence. Wait, didn't this guy bring a funeral dirge last time? The moment the music started, my jaw hit the floor. I stared at the bald bassist's shiny head in a daze. I knew this riff, I had heard it countless times in my previous life. Actually, you couldn't even claim to play the guitar if you didn't know this riff. When the lyrics kicked in, the light reflecting off his scalp felt like a literal halo. Finally, I understood the opera-like music that this mad scientist had been screaming about. The song he presented was identical to Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. Starting as progressive rock, moving through folk and soft rock, and culminating in a violent explosion of hard rock, this track was regarded as one of the greatest pieces of music in history in my previous life. And this crazy mad scientist had even brought the lyrics exactly as they were in the original. Those lyrics said to be the most beautiful in popular music history, written in a trance-like state by the original artist, who was vibe-checking his way through a drug-induced high. Did this guy write this while on drugs? It was a reasonable suspicion. It was impossible to believe that the man who had previously written an operatic funeral dirge could suddenly produce something like this. This song contained the narrative arc that the bald bassist had always insisted upon. The 8-minute epic contained all the elements of a novel: introduction, development, crisis, climax, and resolution. It even had a perfectly circular, reflective structure. To put it simply, while we were asked to write a song, the bald bassist had gone and created a work of art. I think I finally understood his identity. He was a power hitter. The kind of batter who constantly strikes out, but every once in a long while, when the timing is perfect, they hit a grand slam that changes the entire momentum of the game with their own raw power. If this song were released, no one would ever say popular music was of a lower class than opera again. He had brought his very own opera to life. As the song reached its finale, all the instruments cut out, returning to the atmospheric tone of the beginning to bring the journey to a close. You seriously wrote this? Hey, you did drugs, didn't you? Be honest. Just tell me it wasn't heroin at least. Yokishi and I stared at Shuji with looks of pure disbelief. AI was looking at him with similarly wide, startled eyes. Leader, I'm taking charge of the first album. You just sit back, scratch your belly, and take a nice long nap. This match was my total, utter defeat, without a single excuse. The bald bassist was the real deal, a genuine genius, when he actually put his mind to it. How is this result negative? The moment we decided on the songs for the single, we dragged Shuji to the hospital to get him tested for drugs. I told you I didn't do drugs. For the record, the tracks to be included in our debut single were Whatever and Stairway to Heaven. Chapter 48, Side Story. The first single album is already a massive success. Today was the day our single was released. Having grown somewhat wealthy from our performance revenue, Ichigo Production poured resources into promotion, and our faces were plastered across record stores throughout Japan. The sight that left the deepest impression on us was the endless queue of people lining up just to buy our album. He. I'm releasing an album. I'm an artist now. I'm finally a musician. Our bald bassist, Shuji, looked completely out of it, as if he were high on something. Is his normal mental state just naturally similar to being on drugs? Is that how he was able to write Stairway to Heaven? He was trembling, his feet tapping nervously as he sat in front of the computer, constantly refreshing the web page. Since his behavior looked exactly like someone suffering from drug withdrawal, I was genuinely considering whether I needed to take him back to the hospital. The masterpiece of my life. I wonder what the reviews will be. My opera. AI watched the scene with a look of pure exasperation. In fact, AI was the only one currently maintaining a sense of calm. Shuji Ajizan, releasing an album isn't that big of a deal. AI, how did you feel when your first album came out? I didn't really feel anything at all. In truth, despite being an idol, AI didn't care much for public reaction. Since the image she showed the world was nothing but lies, she felt the public's response was ultimately meaningless. Though she made an effort to try and love her fans, she didn't actually harbor any interest in them. Woohyo! What is it? What's the bald guy looking at? Yokishi, our muscular black drummer, hoisted the bald bassist up and tossed him aside to see the screen for himself. Enfant Terribles delivers a sharp rebuke to those who look down on popular music. An album that has elevated pop music to the level of art. It is only 2 songs, but those 2 are more than enough to change the world. Ratings of 10 out of 10, and some even higher. That was how the critics were evaluating our single. But what about the international response? The crazy bassist checked the critics' reviews first, but the primary goal of this single was to gain traction overseas. US Billboard Hot 100 rankings, Stairway to Heaven. For a moment, the Ichigo production office fell into a stunned silence. They suddenly realized one undeniable fact: Enfant Terribles had begun their invasion of the United States. Taking the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 immediately upon release, the sheer power of Enfant Terribles made it no exaggeration to say that a Japanese version of the British invasion had begun. You damn stars. I love you guys. Saito Ichigo, his blonde hair slightly thinning and his beard rough, was the one to break the silence with a roar of delight. These kids really were monsters, weren't they? Miyazaki Makoto, the former PD of Asayan, was at home watching the breaking news about Enfant Terribles with a wide grin, sipping on a beer. Bzzz. Just then, his phone began to vibrate. We need to film a music video to use in the US. Do you know how to shoot one? I heard you were also the one who handled the sound producing for Asayan. Although he had planned to live off his savings for the rest of his life, the thought that working with these troublemakers might be fun crossed his mind. It looked like it was time to end his unemployment. Chapter 49, Before Leaving for the World Tour. 1493 Words recommended listening, All You're Dreaming of by Liam Gallagher. Following that momentum, we released our first and second albums, Definitely Maybe, and What's the Story, Morning Glory. If you're wondering why we dropped 2 albums at once, it's because our songwriting capacity was at its absolute peak. Great songs practically poured out of us with every breath. For instance, watching President Saito enjoy a cigarette with his drink inspired Yokishi to write Cigarettes and Alcohol, a track that had reached #7 on the UK charts in my previous life. Another song, Digsy's Dinner, was born from a melody AI was absent-mindedly humming, which sparked a sudden wave of inspiration. Ultimately, Shuji and I couldn't agree on how to arrange all those masterpieces, so we decided to release them as a double feature. Definitely Maybe, which was filled from start to finish with hope and optimism for the future, was my project. What's the Story, Morning Glory, an album that flowed with an organic, narrative structure, was Shuji's work. Our debut releases, alongside the previously released singles, completely conquered the US Billboard charts, selling a combined 65 million copies. Literally, the entire United States was holding its breath, waiting for Enfant Terribles to begin their tour. Hyde, congrats on sweeping the Billboard charts. Cut the crap. You guys will be catching up soon enough, won't you? The man at the center of this global syndrome, Hyde, was on the phone with Ueda Tatsuya, the leader of a KATTUN, who had once been called Enfant Terrible's rival. Tell AI-chan I'm sorry I couldn't make it. Don't worry, there are plenty of people here to celebrate for you. Yeah, well, you should be the one taking care of your girlfriend anyway. Ueda Tatsuya, my close friend and the leader of a KATTUN, seemed to be misunderstanding my relationship with AI. We were nowhere near that kind of involvement. To begin with, she was only just turning 14. For someone like me, whose mental age was well over 30 in my past life, seeing a child like her as a romantic interest would just be wrong. Though I felt like I'd become more emotionally sentimental recently compared to when I first arrived in this world, she was still like a daughter to me. Disgusting. Oh, look at you, acting like you hate it when you're actually happy. Anyway, I'll pass on the birthday wishes to AI for you. That was right. Time had flowed on, and it was now December. Along with the early snowfall, AI's birthday had arrived. To the members of Enfant Terribles, AI was like a second family, and we were currently in the middle of preparing her birthday party. Hey, stop popping the musk lemon balloons. Baldy, what am I supposed to do? They popped the second I touched them. Of course, the preparation process was a complete mess. We won't see her for a while once the world tour starts, so let's do this right. We were planning a quite grand party because we had to leave for the US tour the day after AI's birthday. Technically, we should have left a week ago, but we pushed the schedule back specifically for this party. Nishijima, you look like you've finally brightened up a bit. The members of AAA had also come to our rehearsal studio to help with the party preparations. AAA had been discarded by their previous agency, but they managed a narrow escape thanks to our help, and were now active under Ichigo production. The Bikomachi girls' skills really improved after they joined. The members of AAA were doubling as trainers for Bikomachi in their spare time. Perhaps because they were still at a growing age, the girls absorbed the teachings like sponges. Now, all the Bikomachi members had become performers capable of truly shining on stage. Teaching those kids wasn't much. They're bringing in professional instructors soon anyway. Nishijima-kun, you stayed up every night planning their training routine, though. Uno, the only female member of AAA, spoke up while playfully nudging his shoulder. Hyde-kun, by the way, what did you get for AI-chan's present? Something incredible. I had prepared something incredible. Something precious that no one else but me could give her. For a girl named Hoshino AI, a birthday was never a day to look forward to. Having never known her father and being abandoned by her mother, her birthday was merely a day that reminded her of her deficiencies. That was why, after all her schedules were finished, she was heading toward the Enfant Terrible's rehearsal studio like any other day. Though this routine would end tomorrow when they left for their world tour, they were the people who always welcomed her, the ones who allowed her to show her sincerity. She opened the studio door, thinking about how she should tease Hyde, who had been acting more sentimental lately. Happy birthday. The girl stood there dazed. The only person she had told her birthday to was President Sato, through her personal information when signing with Ichigo Production. How did you know today was my birthday? Because you told me on your way home once. The one who answered her question was her Oshi, the blonde-haired Hyde. She had certainly babbled about various things while excited in front of him. But even though she had mentioned it in passing, he had remembered it. You remembered that? Of course. It's your birthday, after all. In all her life, she had never been sincerely blessed by someone on the day she was born. There were formal congratulations, but they were nothing more than lies. Being surrounded by so many people celebrating her birth was a first. She felt like she was going to cry at this first experience of genuine blessing from others. You can't cry yet. Look over there. She looked up and saw Uncle Yoki and Uncle Shuji dressed in Santa suits, holding their instruments. It's a replacement since we can't be here for Christmas. Our mascot, AI, you're always welcome to come here whenever you're feeling down. Enfant Terribles was with you from the start, and will always be on your side. Though their tone lacked the usual playfulness, their faces were full of mischief, making her laugh. Then, Hyde threw on a Santa suit, and stepped between the two muscular men. This is my birthday present to you. Naturally, the copyright belongs to you. The AI who had gripped my sleeve with her frail hand, when I was heading home, after busking when I first fell into this world, she had looked so desperate. That was how we started talking, and I realized that behind the child's artificial smile, a dark shadow was hidden. Her sky was one that had given up on any expectations for the world. I tried to look away from her at first, but I couldn't in the end. I eventually decided that I should be the one to fill the deficiencies of such a wounded child. Actually, there wasn't a major reason. I simply couldn't ignore her as an adult who had experienced the world before she did. I came to know that what the wounded girl wanted more than anything was love. But simultaneously, I learned that paradoxically, the girl who craved love more than anyone else was also the most afraid of it. The wounded girl was a coward. She was terrified that the love she gave might be betrayed, or that her sincerity might be rejected. And I realized that Enfant Terribles, having thrown away all pretense, had miraculously become her sanctuary. This song contained the message I wanted to convey to that girl. It was a track that said I, at least, would always be on her side and love her just the same, no matter what she looked like. It was a story telling her that even if I leave for a while, I'm always on her side, so she shouldn't feel too lonely. As the song reached its end, I stepped down from the stage and slowly approached AI. The girl herself seemed quite flustered by my actions. I finally stopped right in front of her and met her eyes. Happy birthday. Sincerely. With all my heart, I left a kiss on her forehead. That day, the first time she had ever truly experienced a real birthday, was a day full of blessings for her. It was the walk home to see AI off, just like any other day, but today, the return trip was filled with the sound of crunching snow rather than the sound of conversation. "Ah, we're here." It was at that moment, when I was about to see her into her house as usual. On the lips. "The rest will happen after you get back. You have to come back healthy." Chapter 50. I just wanted to start a band, but the very first performance in America is already a mess. What did Enfant Terrible's first album, Definitely Maybe, and their second, Morning Glory, actually change? They carved a new path through a music scene that had been suffocating under the weight of commercialism and mannerism. First and foremost, their debut album restored the purity of music that we had forgotten for so long. Why are popular songs called pop? It is because the giants of the past stood beside the masses, representing them, and weaving the zeitgeist of the era into their melodies. In a modern music scene that was flashy but hollow, Enfant Terribles resurrected the concept of sincerity. These three young men from the Far East reclaimed the identity of music that had been corrupted by capital. The fact that their debut sold 65 million copies in such a short time proved that the public had begun to crave the music of these anguished youths, humble yet genuine rather than the artificial spectacle of the status quo. They completely shifted the tides of the industry. Now, every label scout was heading to Japan, searching for the next Enfant Terribles. And today, the band that changed everything, Enfant Terribles, makes their landfall in America. Woo-woo. Across both my lives, I had never once set foot on American soil. And the sight that greeted me upon arrival was one I would never forget as long as I lived. From the moment the plane began its descent, I could see tens of thousands of people waiting for us around the airport. The moment we disembarked and stepped through the arrivals gate, a thunderous roar of cheers welcomed us. Hyung SSI, were we really this big? This is freaking exciting. Our muscular, mixed-race drummer, Yokishi, looked dazed by the reaction, while the bald bassist, Tanaka Shuji, was busy blowing air kisses and soaking up the hospitality of a foreign land. This is quite something, isn't it? Following behind us with the audio equipment was Miyazaki Makoto, the former PD of ASIAN, expressing his awe. Having honed his ear for sound and his understanding of the industry's ecosystem during his time at ASIAN, I had recruited him directly over the phone. He was now accompanying us as both our manager and a production assistant. I should send a text. Despite the events of the night before we left for America, it didn't change the fact that she was a precious person to me, like a daughter. While the girl herself seemed to view me as a romantic interest, I chose to believe it was just a passing fever of youth. Or rather, that was what I wanted to believe. If I actually dated AI, these meatheads would probably snap me in half first. With that thought, I sent the message. A faint smile, one I didn't even notice myself, played on my lips. Just landed. Sending this now so you don't nag me when you wake up. Under heavy security, we headed to the Colorado Desert stage where the Coachella Festival was being held. In my previous life, Coachella was the largest music festival in North America, and that held true in this life as well. We had been invited as headliners. Our world tour would begin right here at Coachella. So those fucking guys are actually coming here. Though this year's Coachella was held in relatively chilly weather, the Colorado stage was packed to the brim with music enthusiasts. Among those enthusiasts was John Frusciante, a pot-bellied man clutching a beer and a hamburger. Having bought tickets for all 6 days of the festival, he was currently yawning his way through the performances. Tired of overproduced music, the only reason he had emptied his wallet for every single day was to see Enfant Terrible's first US gig. Since the organizers hadn't announced exactly when the band would take the stage, he had been forced to buy the full 6-day pass. I spent so much damn money, if they're a letdown, I'm coming after them with a pistol. Suddenly, the mechanical roar of a helicopter echoed above the Colorado stage. The chopper, painted in garish colors, was charging fiercely toward the stage. Thud 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 thud. As the helicopter hovered low over the deck, 3 muscular men leaped out and began waving their hands. Asians. Their builds are bigger than most Americans. And that black guy on the left, what's with those muscles? He looks like the Hulk. Seconds later, the stage exploded into a frenzy of cheers. The 3 men who had made such a loud entrance were none other than Enfants Terribles. Some female fans fainted the moment they saw the beautiful, blonde-haired youth, while the male fans were already stripping off their shirts, ready to mosh. Security guards rushed in, trying to calm the hysterical crowd, but the stage had already descended into absolute chaos. In the midst of the madness, the music kicked off with the primal thud of drums and the screech of guitar strings drenched in heavy distortion. You guys in the back, get your asses up and jump. The song was supersonic. According to their interviews, the song was written while they were waiting for black bean noodle delivery. When it didn't arrive, they supposedly shouted, "Fuck it, let's go supersonic," and composed it on the spot. That song, born from a frustrated shout, was currently turning the Colorado stage into a war zone. Was the ticket price actually too cheap? John Frusciante, the pot-bellied man, found himself swept up in the madness of Enfants Terribles. The first American performance of Enfants Terribles was a resounding success. Equals 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 equals. The website for reading paid chapters is available on my Patreon. The number of chapters on Patreon, 137 link, patreon.com/ultramagnus_T chapter 51. I just wanted to start a band, but since Japan and America were the same, I flipped them both over the same way. Leader, is this for real? These sons of bitches. Shuji, our bald bassist, was turning a shade of tomato red as he erupted in raw fury. We were in the middle of our US tour, and naturally, we had stopped by a broadcasting station to perform a live set. Japan, America, they're all the same. Hey, man, does this make any sense? Do they not know about the absolute chaos we caused in Japan? I let out a heavy sigh. Beside me, Yokishi, our muscular mixed-race drummer, was clicking his tongue and shaking his head in disbelief. The program we were scheduled for was a music show that introduced pop hits through live performances. Like similar shows in Korea, it was a straightforward format, no rankings or winners, just a space to promote yourself, sing your song, and head out. Usually, a band earns far more from tours than broadcasts, so TV appearances are strictly for promotion. The problem was that for one of our few promotional slots in the US, they had demanded we hand sync. Since this was America, and not Enfants Terribles' home turf, I thought we could endure it just this once. God damn it. We're not fucking clowns. We were livid. We had explicitly demanded a live set from the station, and they had agreed to it. That was the only reason we were here. In the end, we went through with a lip-synced performance consisting of hand syncing. We played air guitar and bobbed our heads like goldfish while pre-recorded tracks filled the air. Having just finished a stage like that, our anger was entirely justified. We are a rock band. For a rock band, chaos is practically a part of our identity. With a voice edged in irritation, I asked Miyazaki Makoto, who was currently acting as our manager, for the date of our next broadcast appearance. When is the next broadcast scheduled? We were being ignored like this because we hadn't caused enough of a scene. As I thought, a rock band only gets respected when they start breaking things. Even though it was 5 a.m., AI hadn't gone to sleep. She was fighting off the drowsiness with coffee, something she didn't usually drink. The reason was simple: she wanted to see Hyde's appearance on the American show. They say people change once they get a taste of the US, but she had been shocked to see Enfants Terribles hand syncing and lip syncing during the previous broadcast. Hyde, please just get through today quietly without any trouble. As the broadcast began, Enfants Terribles appeared as the very first act. But that look on his face, it felt familiar. I feel like I've seen that expression somewhere before. As the music started, Shuji-san began playing blatant air guitar. Not only that, he took one hand off the instrument to chow down on candy while flipping off the camera. Why does this feel like déjà vu? A scene she had tried to suppress, a memory so shocking it had been pushed to the back of her mind, began to resurface. The sight of a bodybuilding competition, a grotesque dance performance, and microphone eating happening all at once on stage. Hyde, it's a lip sync. Are you even allowed to use your voice? Even Hyde, whom she trusted, was now singing lyrics that had absolutely nothing to do with the backing track. Of course, he was liberally peppering in the word fuck between every other line. Fortunately, this time a PD was sprinting onto the stage to stop the mayhem. The problem was that Shuji-san sent the PD flying off the stage with a clean uppercut. If you ever pull that lip sync, hand sync bullshit on us again, we'll turn the place upside down. You call Goldfish Mouth flapping a live show? All three members of Enfant Terribles held up their middle fingers to the camera, as if greeting her personally. At least they look healthy, is that a relief? As that thought crossed her mind, the coffee she had been holding in her mouth began to dribble out. The status update Enfant Terribles had sent to AI was, in every sense of the word, a total disaster. In American broadcasting, which had been full of docile sheep due to the absence of real rock bands, an unprecedented incident had occurred. Following Enfant Terribles' completely unhinged broadcast, they became the #1 topic of debate across the country. What is this Asian kid doing being so arrogant? As long as the song is good, who cares? Honestly, can you even call someone a singer if they just flap their lips to a recording? This is an insult to America. We should make this a diplomatic issue. Bullshit. If this is a diplomatic issue, is my successful bowel movement this morning also a diplomatic issue? A true star is meant to make both fans and haters lose their minds. And sometimes they make fellow stars lose their minds too. The Emperor of Pop, Michael Jackson, proposes a collaboration stage to Enfant Terribles. Regardless of their own intentions, Enfant Terribles was hurtling toward becoming the icons of the era. Chapter 52, Side Story, I just wanted to meet Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson wants us to do a collaboration stage with him. Baldy, he's an older brother with way more years than you. Use some respect. Who exactly was Michael Jackson, a figure capable of making the members of Enfant Terribles the most reckless of rebels act with such politeness? To summarize in a single sentence, he was the man known as the King of Pop in my previous life. People here even called him the God of Pop. One thing was certain, in both lives, Michael Jackson was the greatest star the American music industry had ever produced. He was a man I couldn't possibly ignore. He was the one who had practically finished off the genre I didn't just love, but to which I had dedicated my entire life. Rock. In my past life, Michael Jackson was the figure who brought the era of rock to an end. But isn't he currently in seclusion? As much as he was a brilliantly shining star, he was also the primary target for yellow journalism and media outlets hunting for profitable gossip. In my memory, he should be in hiding right now, driven to the brink by irresponsible reports that branded him as mentally unstable, having lost all motivation. Leader, if he's in seclusion, shouldn't we just go find him? Exactly, bro. Being in seclusion just means he's at home, right? That was true. Being in seclusion essentially meant staying at home. Even though it was late at night, if we went now, we might be able to sit down and have a cozy cup of tea. However, Miyazaki Makoto, the PD of Asian, blocked us as we were about to head to Michael Jackson's house. But there are so many rumors about that guy. It could actually ruin your image. That's the entertainment industry, a world where even lies become the truth. It was advice well suited for someone working in the Japanese entertainment industry, who had heard all sorts of rumors, but there was one thing he overlooked. Makoto Hyung, we've always been the type of guys to move forward while telling stuff like that to piss off. You only ever call me Hyung at times like this, don't you? Since when did Enfant Terribles care about such things? Since the topic had been brought up, we were going to storm Michael Jackson's house directly. So what if there's a controversy? We can just tell them to eat shit. Instrumentalists are a breed that would walk into hell with their own 2 feet, if it meant they could play good music. We headed straight for Neverland Ranch, known as Michael Jackson's mansion. In my previous life, he had moved out in 2005 due to financial issues, but here, perhaps because he had earned even more money, Michael Jackson was still residing at Neverland Ranch. Big Bro MJ. We're here. Tanaka Shuji, the bald bassist whose insanity reigned supreme even within Enfant Terribles, was clinging to the main gate of Neverland Ranch and shouting for Michael Jackson. That crazy bastard. He was even using the gaps in the gate as leverage, scaling the main entrance, as if he were prepared to hop over it entirely. Hey, this is too high. Musselman, you break the gate down. You think that'll work? Did you skip your meds today? In the middle of our commotion, the sound of a train whistled from a distance, and a man began walking toward us from the train station inside the ranch. Enfant Terribles. It looked like we had screwed up the first meeting. The person who walked out from the station was Michael Jackson. Big Bro MJ, how did you know we were coming? I received a call from security saying there were people trying to climb over the gate on the CCTV. I was curious to see who it was. I didn't think there was anyone left who would seek me out like this anymore. Chapter 53, Side Story, The King Wanted to Make Music Again. Michael Jackson's residence, Neverland Ranch, was legendary in my past life for its massive grounds and various facilities that felt like an amusement park. It was an estate large enough to have its own private fire station and a functioning train line. And the Neverland Ranch of this life was no different, boasting an incredible scale that made it no exaggeration to say every leisure facility in the world was gathered here. In fact, it seemed even larger than before. The grounds even hosted a Starbucks cafe and a McDonald's specifically for Michael Jackson's private use. It would be great to bring AI here if I ever get the chance. Children naturally love amusement parks. Beyond that, Neverland Ranch even featured a cinema and a music studio. If AI had come here, she definitely would have been jumping for joy. Regardless, the vast plains of Neverland Ranch showed no sign of ending, even as we moved by train. Mikkel Hyung. Just how much money do you have in your bank account? If we exclude stocks and real estate. $5 billion. No, boss. It wasn't that we weren't making money. With our first single released, and having moved a total of 65 million copies across 2 albums, I currently had about $200 million piled up in my own account. $5 billion, the amount is well over 2 trillion won. In a world where bands never existed, he had moved beyond the title of the King of Pop from my previous life to be called the God of Pop, and his earnings seemed to exceed his previous life accordingly. Even for someone like me, who stole music called masterpieces in my past life to make my way, and only had a balance slightly over $200 million, the man in this life certainly deserved to be called a god. We continued to ride the Neverland Ranch train for a long while before finally reaching the residence within the residence where Michael Jackson stayed. By the way, is there a reason you've come to find me at this hour? Michael Jackson could not understand why the members of Enfant Terribles had come to see him so late at night. Even though Neverland Ranch was technically open 24 hours a day, ever since the 2005 scandal and legal battle, he had been treated like a lunatic and denounced as literal trash by the entire world. Seeking him out late at night was something that would not help these rising stars who were just beginning to establish themselves in the American entertainment industry. Because you asked us for a collab, Mikkel Hyung. Of course, after seeing Enfant Terribles wreck the very broadcasting stations that had tormented him, he had smiled broadly and suggested a collaboration stage through his agent. He had done so while being fully prepared for a rejection. Just for that reason. If that were the case, through my agent. Mikkel Hyung, we usually prefer to meet the people we work with in person first. It was still incomprehensible to him. He was a fading star who had lost his motivation due to the media's character assassination and chose to live in seclusion, while they were rising stars with the talent to represent the era for decades to come. I made that offer fully expecting it to be rejected. For you all, who have just begun to stretch your wings, associating with me will not be beneficial. In the first place, the offer to Enfant Terribles was an act of gratitude, because they had given a small gift to his tedious life. Even though he was in seclusion, he still held the influence to bring attention to anyone associated with him. However, performing on stage together was a completely different matter. But the thing is, we're the kind of guys who will go to the ends of hell if it means we can make good music. So Hyung, let's skip the stage for now and just make one song with us. They asked to make music with me while the stars in their eyes shone brightly. It had been a long time since I abandoned my interest in such things. Music had given him everything, but at the same time, it had made it impossible for him to be with anyone. Yet, at the same time, the image of his younger self flickered through his mind. Those days when he was overflowing with vigor and passion, creating his own music without caring one bit about the public's gaze. Making music with me will not help your future activities at all. A musician is supposed to speak through their music. The sentence they spoke was a line that pierced through his entire life. Whether it was facing discrimination as the first black artist in the mainstream pop industry, being the subject of public gossip due to vitiligo, or being falsely accused of sexual harassment in '94, he had always crushed all controversies with his music, proving himself as a musician. A musician is supposed to speak through their music, those are truly fine words. Whether it was a longing for his youth, or the sincerity of these immature rascals toward music, the reason wasn't clear, but a small flame was flickering back to life in the heart of the exhausted king of pop. Making music with me is very difficult. Because the music must always be perfect. A musician is often a different person when working compared to their everyday self. Michael Jackson decided he would show these juniors, who didn't know their place, exactly what it meant to be a legend among legends. Chapter 54, Side Story. The boy suddenly became lost in thought. 1048 words. As I always say, rock is the music of the masses and the music of the weak. That's why the method of making songs is simple, and anyone can easily participate. You just create a melody and fit lyrics and a chorus to match. Sometimes it's the other way around, but writing a song in the rock genre isn't as difficult as you'd think. That's why in rock, composition is strictly a domain of talent and instinct. Writing a song itself isn't hard, but writing a good song is. It's because you have to write without any guidelines, using only the works of predecessors or your own talent and instinct as a guiding light. Why not try a different note here instead of this one? And Michael Jackson was an elite. He was an elite who had received rigorous training as a musician from a young age. While his instinct and talent for music were outstanding, his knowledge to make that talent shine even brighter was also superior. This sound is different from what I have in mind. Specifically, his knowledge of what was needed to create a good sound was exceptional. Because of that, he would come in with every element of the song, including the harmonies, already completed in his head. In other words, he arrived with everything from arrangement to production thoroughly designed in his mind. This method of composition was impossible without professional mixing expertise and an extraordinary sense for music. I feel like a total deadbeat right now. And I couldn't keep up with Michael Jackson's style. Shuji and Yokishi were geniuses to begin with, and they were also elites who had professionally studied mixing as a core requirement in school, so they seemed to fit well with Michael's instinctive yet theoretical style. Unlike them, I had been a person of mediocre talent since my previous life. Even during university, I was just an ordinary guitar player who had never learned anything like mixing. To begin with, I don't know anything besides the guitar, so if I'm not composing with one, there's nothing for me to do. That was why I had no choice but to take a step back from their conversation about EQ frequencies, or which effects should be applied to the sound. Even if I listen, I don't understand it. You've been quiet for a while, you okay? Hey, don't you think Shuji's point makes more sense than Michael's? Honestly, even if they ask me, I have nothing specific to say. My style is to rely entirely on my intuition when composing. And since coming to this world, I've just been putting in the effort to manifest the masterpieces that existed in my past life. To me, Shuji's method seems better. That sound has a more future-oriented vibe. Haidkoen, a vibe is important in music, but ultimately, a vibe is created from the harmony of sounds. A vibe and a good sound are strictly different. Now, listen. If it stays like that, then later. However, my thoughts differed from Michael Jackson's. In my opinion, what determines the quality of a song isn't the audio effects added after the song is made, but the melody, the sound, and the riffs. If the basic skeleton hasn't even been built, what's the point of pouring cement? Audio effects are merely seasoning. I cut off Michael Jackson and spoke up. I'm a guy who composes with an instrument, so I don't have much to say. But talking about production when the skeleton of the song hasn't even been formed, I don't think that's right. Still, production is an essential part of the song. Therefore, it's better to consider what effects will be used from the moment the skeleton is being built. It makes the sound more harmonious. Jackson, we are instrumentalists, not engineers. We don't just select and combine sound sources like other artists do. To us, the way to make a good sound depends on the instrument, not on how we're going to apply effects. I threw those words out and stormed out of the studio. Honestly, I was envious of their talent. My style was to piecemeal things together through trial and error, so I couldn't keep up with them. Of course, it's not that I'm the strange one. Most bands create songs just like I do. Through the process of composition-arrangement-production. In fact, I already knew the truth. It's an obvious fact that if production is considered from the composition stage, the quality of the sound will naturally improve. It's true that the instrumental sound is the core for a band, but it's not like production isn't part of making an album. It's just that I don't have that level of talent. Seeing that even Yokishi and Shuji were pulling it off, the method Michael Jackson mentioned certainly wasn't impossible. What's natural for them isn't natural for me. With that thought, I suddenly missed the cigarettes I used to smoke in my past life. In the end, nothing has changed for me here either. Hoshino AI Hyde, I saw your last stage. As expected, Hyde's stage is the best. Walking along the path next to the studio, I checked the text AI had sent me. The best, huh? Since I had just walked out after such an experience, seeing AI's message actually made me grow even more pensive. Since coming to this world, the only song I had genuinely composed was All You're Dreaming Of, which I had given to AI as a gift. Aside from that, there was nothing. In this world, I was being revered as a genius songwriter, but all the songs that earned me that reverence were just things I had stolen from the inspirations of geniuses from my past life. In terms of raw talent, Yokishi and Shuji were ahead of me. The only thing I had over them was that I had heard more masterpieces in my previous life than they had. I've always pursued sincerity, but I was the one most filled with lies. That thought suddenly flashed through my mind. Leader. Hyung. But my precious bandmates found me before I could dwell on those thoughts any further. Chapter 55, Side Story, Musicians Grow Through Interaction. 1061 words recommended reading while listening to Green Day's Basket Case. I wrote a song using that day's experience as inspiration. It wasn't exactly the kind of track that fit a collaboration with Michael Jackson, but if all else failed, I could just release it as an Enfant Terrible single, or include it as a B-side. The name of the second song I composed after coming to this world was Basket Case. In America, the term is used for someone who is exhausted and stressed. In the UK, it refers to someone who is losing their mind. Even though the phrase itself never appears in the lyrics, I chose it as the title because I felt it perfectly mirrored my current situation. This song is packed with my narrative and my philosophy on music. Music should be simple. It shouldn't be overly complex or difficult to listen to. An artist should take a great, accessible melody and imbue it with their own story. Because this track is punk rock, a genre where raw, unrefined emotion is everything, it's something that could never be made using Michael Jackson's methods. A band has the band's way, and a solo singer has the solo singer's way. Jackson's method is correct, but so is mine. With Basket Case, I intended to seize control of the studio back for Enfants Terribles. Michael Jackson and we were equal artists, not teacher and disciples. He was treating us like students, but we have our own path. There are no right answers in music, so if both parties are musicians, they shouldn't be in a one-sided teaching relationship, they should be exchanging ideas. Thus, I planned to convince him using my own methods. I would show him a perspective he couldn't have known because of the absence of band music in this world. Last time, I had kept my mouth shut, mesmerized by Michael Jackson's talent and know-how. But isn't life too short to spend it only listening to what others have to say? I entered the studio holding the sheet music. Perhaps because I was late finishing the composition, Shuji, Yokishi, and Michael Jackson were already gathered there. Jackson, this is my response to our last conversation. I said that and handed the sheet music to Yokishi and Shuji. The leader always causes trouble whenever he has that look on his face, Shuji remarked. When did you write something like this? Yokishi added, surprised. I ignored their comments and quietly picked up my guitar. Last time, I had made a pathetic display of myself due to a sense of inferiority regarding talent, but not this time. Just as we had learned from his expertise, he needed to learn from us. While the Michael Jackson of my previous life was a master, the Michael Jackson of this life was still somewhat unrefined in handling instrumental sounds. Specifically, he didn't seem to fully grasp the distinction between rock and pop, or the difference between organic instrument tones and synthesized machine sounds. As long as he failed to recognize that gap, our collaboration would eventually hit a wall anyway. This song is my own autobiography. All the success I've achieved so far was only possible because I stole inspiration from the geniuses of the past. I was being hailed as a genius who represented the era, but that title is a heavy burden to bear. After all, in the beginning, I just wanted to start a band. Because of that, I carried a constant anxiety about the future. I worried about what would happen once I finished releasing all the songs I remembered. By then, Yokishi and Shuji's skills would have improved so drastically that I might find it difficult even to keep up with them. In this world, those with stars in their eyes are the genuine geniuses, and compared to them, I was always just a dullard. That was why I was restless. Especially since I had always been shouting rock and roll at the top of my lungs. Isn't it a joke? I, who threw away affectation and lies to cry out for sincerity, am actually the person most filled with lies. Publicly, I scream for sincerity, while my success is built on the lie of stolen inspiration. Every time I thought about that contradiction, I felt like I was going to collapse. What would happen if my secret was revealed? Would I be met with nothing but contempt? But now is not the time for such worries. I have band members who trust and follow me, and a little girl who relies on me. That's why I can't afford to break down yet. For now, I cast those thoughts aside. Those are worries to be had after achieving success. What could be more pathetic than giving up on the race because you were too busy worrying? Even if I burn up and disappear while running, I will not stop. Because it is better to burn out in a single blaze than to slowly fade away. Watching the performance, Michael Jackson could not help but admit it. He had been trapped in his own prejudices. The way they handled instrument sounds was bound to be different from his own methods. While he hadn't intended to look down on them, he had unconsciously viewed them as children who needed his tutoring. I suppose I've truly grown old, he thought. He was once the man who created music by sticking to his own methods even when everyone else opposed them. Musicians shouldn't have one side teaching the other, they should exchange with one another. He was currently doing the very thing he had vowed never to do in his youth. If this was the method of the new era, then his job wasn't to dismiss it as wrong, but to melt it into his own style. You really got me with that one, he admitted. Michael Jackson felt like he could produce a truly legendary piece of music for the first time in a while. Now that he understood a new approach, countless musical ideas were flooding his mind. For the first time in a long time, the king felt that music was going to be fun. equals 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 equals. The website for reading paid chapters is available on my Patreon. The number of chapters on Patreon, 137. Link, patreon.com/ultramagnus_t. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.